Today is May 29th, 2015, and it is my pleasure to be talking this morning with Stephen Kafoury. Stephen was a state representative in the Oregon legislature during the early 1970s when the program was adopted, serving as the chair of the Joint Committee on Land Use. Stephen has also been a state senator, served on the board of the Oregon chapter of the American Planning Association, and as board chair of the Oregon League of Conservation Voters. Stephen, my name is Dillon Mahmoudi, and I'm a PhD graduate student candidate now in the Urban Studies and Planning program. Most of my research is comparing different cities, so I'm very interested in what you're going to have to say today. With that said, we're honored to have you here with us and willing to sit down. We're hoping to gather as much information as we can, especially from the people who are influential in forming and shaping Oregon's land use system. So we're aiming to document the stories, anecdotes, and experiences of people who are involved, as well as to get your thoughts on how the system has evolved and where you think it might be headed. So we encourage you to share anything you feel that is relevant to this effort. So let's jump in.
Okay.
I was hoping you could touch on your personal and professional relationship. It's a big question. Personal and professional relationship with Oregon's land use system.
Okay. My professional relationship is that I served on the committee, it was called Energy and Land Use, or Land Use and Environment, I don't remember the name now, back in the 1973 legislative session when Senate Bill 100 was written. Ted Halleck was a very close associate of mine, and I followed what was happening in the Senate very closely. But as you know, all the decisions were made in the Senate. My main role, in fact, my only role in Senate Bill 100 was when Ted Halleck came to see me after the bill had passed in the Senate and said, it passed by one vote and Vicatilla has changed his mind. He's going to vote no if the bill comes back for concurrence. So your job is to make sure that no changes are made in the bill in the House. There was a request of the League of Oregon Cities. They wanted to have the same they wanted to have the same planning authority that counties do. And Mary Burroughs was a representative from Eugene, who later became mayor of Eugene, was kind of intrigued by that idea. And I said, no, we can't change even one comma in that bill or it won't happen. So I made sure nothing happened, it didn't, and the bill passed. Then part of the deal was the establishment of the Joint Committee on Land Use, and I chaired that. We held a lot of hearings. And one thing that we looked at was Governor McCall's concept of some kind of capture of increased value from land use planning and then using that money to pay for takings. That turned out to be not practical. And after we heard a lot of people talk about it, and that idea was dropped and has never been taken up seriously. There was an attempt by Robert Liberty in Metro for a while to put something together, and I was on a committee that he put together to try to work something out for Metro to do that, and it got to be so complicated so quickly. Just it's not practical.
Yeah.
Then later, I was hired many years later by the Oregon chapter of the American Planning Association to be their lobbyist. I should say in the interim, my second wife, Marjorie, my present wife, was elected to the Metro Council, to the first Metro Council, and she served as its second chair. And so I kept up with what was going on in land use during those times a lot, but just as an observer, not as a participant. I did attend some of the hearings, work sessions that were set up when the goals were written, and found that process kind of interesting. So that's kind of my involvement as a lobbyist with the Planning Association. I've been very involved in trying to pass, but mostly kill a lot of bills over the last few years.
I'm really interested.
I just wanted to think of that. I was one of the very first members of 1,000 Friends of Oregon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so Henry said, I think I got several of my brothers to join. He said we had more Kafourys than anybody else. And, 1,000 friends was highly aspirational at that time. There may have been 50 friends or so. 25.
I want to go back to this. I find this really interesting. The you couldn't let anything happen. No wording changes at all.
Yeah, the way that the legislature works is that the piece of legislation has to pass in exactly the same words, even to punctuation marks in both bodies. So if one body passes a law, sends it over to the second body amends it, then it has to go back to the first body for what's called concurrence. They have to agree to that amendment. If they don't agree to it, then either dies or a conference committee is set up to try and reconcile those two. But pretty much here it would have died.
So how did you make sure that there were absolutely no changes? Because it sounded like there was a lot of pressure from different groups to either amend or alter, the wording.
I just told people it couldn't be done. Don't do it.
That's great. Okay, well, I want to get back to the APA bit a little bit later, but
yeah.
Let's go to the second question, and I'll incorporate the APA piece in the later questions. So, the Senate Bill 100 created a framework for land use planning across the state. Based on this legislation, the statewide planning goals were drafted to express the state's policy interests in local land use planning. Do you believe LCDC, the Land Conservation Development Commission, that was created from this legislation, acted correctly to ensure these objectives have been carried out?
Overall, yes. I need to do a little caveat here. I'm certainly not an expert on land use planning. I'm an expert in, let's say, process, and that's what I'm hired to do as a lobbyist. But I bring in the experts when details come down. And one thing that's happened, I think there's a question later on about this, I might as well just mention it now. One thing that's happened in the land use system that we did not anticipate when it was passed, it has become enormously complex and technical and lawyer-driven. I mean, the concept of, one of the major concepts of the land use planning process was predictability, that you would zone a piece of property and then everyone would know that was what it was going to be used for. And it's not that easy.
Can you say more? I mean, certainly I have my own understanding of what that predictability might look like, but that's only because I'm a graduate student reading it in books and everything. I'm hoping you can elaborate
Well, I think
a little
overall,
bit.
there's no question that in broad strokes, we have pretty much kept development within cities. We protected farm and forest land. These major goals, we have none. But when you try and expand UGB, there should be a process that you do A, you do B, you C, and then you get your decisions made. Yeah, you met the standards. No, you didn't meet the standards. But in actuality, if there's controversy over it, you're going to have a lot of litigation and a lot of politics both. And we see a lot in the legislature, people who try and go through the land use process, may even have hired a lawyer and then found out they didn't get what they want. They come to the legislature to try and change the statutes. And that's one of the main things that we fight against at the OAPA.
Yeah.
Is legislative one-offs.
Any examples that come to mind?
Oh, destination resorts, I guess, at the top of my head would be a big example of those.
Yeah.
And there's been some UGB things. And then just recently, what happened at the grand bargain in Washington County, where they had to clean up what had been kind of agreed to, but not in enough detail.
That's great. I love these examples, so I'm hoping we can get to those.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm gonna keep going through the questions, and we'll continue to come back to them. The LCDC adopted 19 statewide goals. Which goals do you believe have been the most important to the accomplishment of the state land use program? And which ones do you feel have been the least important?
Well, I think the most important ones have been the urbanization goals. And I think the citizen involvement goals. And that hasn't always been fulfilled, and it's certainly attacked every legislative session, but those are two pretty important ones. One that has not worked out so well is natural resource planning. And two things that happened. One is that, in my view, the gravel industry got in there and got themselves declared a natural resource, and you know the story there. So you get the farmers versus the gravel pit people, and those issues go on, and they come back at recession. The other thing that we didn't get very well done, and I don't know if this is a problem of the goals or enforcement or local government or not enough money or too much controversy, but there's been very little other kind of natural resource, wildlife planning, for example, has been really minimized. And to some extent, that's a function of the focus of 1,000 Friends of Oregon, who have really narrowed what their goals are pretty much to protecting farmland. Mm-hmm. And they don't get involved in protecting big game habitat, for example, or wetlands or things like that so much. They're pretty much focused on farmland. And there's no other organization that has the political strength and technical know-how to fill that gap. So you've got pretty much all of the developer and city government people on one side, and you've got the animals on the other side. Mm-hmm. One of my clients is a wildlife biologist, and it's called the Wildlife Society. And then there are, Oregon Wild and some of these other organizations, but they have not really taken on the land use system as a target of activity.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that the way that wildlife has been perceived in Oregon has changed significantly, so that land use could, that wildlife and land use could be tied together? Is that?
They absolutely should be, and to some extent they are. But ODF&W has mostly advisory authority. They don't really have the ability to say, no, you can't do that here. Yeah. And they don't, and there hasn't been the linkage inside state agencies, so that ODF&W would go to LCDC and say, we need to do something about this.
Mm-hmm. So what would that look like? I mean,
well, there's been discussion in every session of an agency, an overall agency, natural resources. Some states have this, and that these other agencies would be subsets of that. Mm-hmm. There's no political will to do that, but that would be one way. The ODF&W developed a plan called the Oregon Conservation Strategy, mm-hmm. and if this were implemented the way it should be, there would be a lot more tied into LCDC, mm-hmm. but it's kind of pretty much one-off.
Yeah. So you had mentioned this a little bit earlier. What land use policies, subjects, or topics are missing from the LCDC that should have addressed in the goals? It should have been addressed in the goals.
Well, this goes back, in my view, again to the development of Senate Bill 100 in the first place, and that was original areas of statewide concern that got left out. And I would have liked to seen the state have more involvement in the coastal region, the Wallowa Lake area, those kinds of places. Sustains. I mean, there should be some places, and then areas of statewide activity was the other thing that didn't get in. Interchanges on the freeways and those kind of things. LB Day came in and saved the day, literally, when he was the negotiations were falling apart, and he came back in, put together a plan that eventually passed, and a couple of these fell by the wayside, and I think that's a shame.
Mm-hmm. So what did that negotiation kind of look like? What did he had to cut? Yeah.
He had to cut the areas of statewide concern and the activities of statewide concern.
And that was the only way that he could get this yeah.
I don't know how much. It's interesting. I've never talked to him about this. Of course, he's dead now, but directly. There are some people like LB Day, who was a labor negotiator, And I think Richard Whitman fits into this category too, who are facilitators and people who make things happen, more than people with policy goals. And I never asked LB Day, you know, what was your policy goal here? I think his job was very singular, and that was to get a bill through. And he was going to do what needed to be done, negotiated and found out what could pass and got that happen. So I don't know whether he ever personally even thought about whether any of these things were good ideas or not.
And so maybe you can elaborate a little bit on kind of what the negotiations or what the interests were that he was negotiating, because it might seem actually counterintuitive that these kinds of things were dropped from the kind of final.
Well, the issue was how much should the state be running things and how much should local governments be running things. Mm-hmm. And back in those days, before we had this huge move to the suburbs, there were a lot more rural representatives. The rural legislators are a very small portion now of the legislature. But in those days, there were a lot of rural legislators, and the other thing that was different in those days was there was a huge overlap between conservative Democrats and liberal Republicans. So party identity was not as important as geographical identity. Mm-hmm. And so you had a combination of rural people who wanted to protect, you know, they come from a local control background, local control philosophy. And conservatives who also have a local control and don't want a big state bureaucracy. So those two groups together were fighting essentially against the urban people. And it's funny that if you look at Patrick McPherson, who was a Republican and a farmer, but his goal was more in line with what the urban people wanted, Ted Halleck.
Mm-hmm. So that tension between local and state comes up quite a bit, actually.
It's always going to be there. The system was designed that way.
Yeah.
And I think it's healthy. Either one too strong is going to be a problem. So if you have a tension there, that's trying to keep things from going one way the other way too hard.
So in what ways have you seen that tension come out as part of the APA, as your role with the APA?
Well, it's interesting because the APA has quite a variety of interests within it. Mm-hmm. We have, county planning commissioners who are real strong on, let me do my thing in my county, and people who work for them. And then you have people like Ed Sullivan on the other side. Is he on your list?
Yes, he's not there yet.
Okay. Who, philosophically and professionally both very interested in tight central control and following the policies and the laws that have been set down in the past. So there's dissension inside. So we often don't get involved in a lot of issues that come up. We do have some principles that we follow pretty closely, like opposing one-offs. Mm-hmm. And anytime that comes into the legislature, then I'm directed to go put my feet on it. We don't get involved in annexation issues, which is interesting. I know that philosophically we feel pretty strongly about how we've gotten screwed up. The state's annexation policy is really bad and antithetical to good land use planning. But there's divisions on that. There's some economic development debates that go on internally, and how much focusing basically on how you deal with industrial lands, and that sometimes comes into conflict, internal conflict in the organization. And there are always industrial lands. People have this philosophy, if we build it, they will come. If I can just get more industrial land, so we'll be rich. People are going to come to Prineville in droves, they're going to come down to Lakeview and just get some more acreage.
Let's see. So let's move on a little bit, but I'm gonna keep coming back to that tension. In 1974, the LCDC and the DLCD undertook what was at the time unprecedented public outreach and involvement effort in adopting the first 14 goals. Was this worth doing? And how, if at all, did it affect your thinking and views?
Well, I think it was enormously well worth doing because it's something you can always go back to and say, this wasn't done by a bunch of citizens, it wasn't done by planners and it goes on. There's some mythology going on here. I was present at some of those, and most of the folks who showed up were planner types. And they may have been architects, they may have been city government officials or people that work for government and planners. But there were people, it was a very knowledgeable crew, and I think that's a good thing because you want people to have some background. On the other hand, I think it's been kind of romanticized that this was a bunch of citizens come together expressing what they wanted. I think the output was good. I think what they came up with I like, and I think it gives a veneer of authenticity to the whole plan. And of course, then you have a couple of big statewide elections, that also gives an imprimatur to the citizens that, yeah, we like this. And right now, in legislative debates, people will always start off by saying, I support Oregon's land use system, but nobody says, I don't like Oregon's land use system.
Yeah. Well, goal 1, citizen involvement, which is what you were saying, is probably one of the more successful goals, is considered by many as critical to the development and execution of Oregon's planning program. This seems like a no-brainer based off of what you said, but is it still relevant today?
And all I have to do is go to a planning commission meeting sometime and see. Look what's happened with the Thousand Friends of Oregon spin-offs around the state. I mean, this is something that I think it's real democracy with a small d to me, and I think it's a great thing to get people involved. There's obviously a lot of NIMBYism, but these people come to the legislature and testify, which they do a lot. They're educated. They understand how the system works. This has been a really significant opportunity to build a big constituency of knowledgeable people. And I'm really impressed with what that has produced just in terms of a body of educated citizenry.
So tell me more about Thousand Friends of Oregon and how they got it right to that model of promoting democracy and citizen involvement and how that's kind of spread across the state.
Well, Thousand Friends of Oregon was a brainchild of Tom McCollum and Henry Richmond. And Henry is one of my heroes. There are a number of people in different areas where a single individual has stood up and said, I think I can do this, and has the capability and the ingenuity and the drive to make it happen. And he started an organization and then got a couple of lawyers to work for him for nothing. Almost. I mean, I think they were making like $10,000 a year at the time, which would be equivalent to like $40,000 now. And these are guys who could have made several $100,000 a year practicing, but were passionate and were driven. And they did a couple of things. One is to very strategically take on some land use cases that set precedent, and then built up a constituency to back up what they did.
So what were the kind of landmark kind of moments in Thousand Friends of Oregon, I guess, in building up those constituents?
Well, Rajneesh thing was obviously a big one.
Right.
And they exploited that shamelessly.
Say more.
Well, they took an issue which was really political and fear-mongering in a lot of ways, and made it into a land use issue. And they got a huge increase in their membership at that time by fear-mongering. And it worked.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so
And, you know, I'm not a good enough lawyer that people like, well, Henry would be glad to tell you, and I'm sure Dick Benner's already told you, the specific cases along the way that made key precedents. I really don't know that. I'm not a land use lawyer.
yeah. So we keep going back to the balance between state and local. In your opinion, have the statewide planning goals struck that balance between state and local control that the LCDC intended to originally?
It's a continuing swinging back and forth. It's not static at all.
Mm-hmm.
And depends on the issue and the time. But sometimes it'll be more state, sometimes more local. I think major problem, in my view, that's kept it from being what it should be is lack of funding.
Mm-hmm.
Planning is expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this is Ed Sullivan, his big bugaboo, when you talk to him, is, you know, periodic review has almost disappeared, and it's a real shame because, you know, there was this first plan acknowledgement that meant a lot. You had to step through hoops and show that you'd done it right. And since then, there really hasn't been the money or the will to get the money to go back and say, well, what's happened since then?
Mm-hmm.
So that has really swung the pendulum into total local.
It's not the only time. I mean, and can you talk about how the pendulum has gone back and forth from starting in 1974, and then kind of how you've seen it go back and forth?
Well, it was originally, you know, very heavily on the state. The state came down and said, you will have to do plans, and here's what the rules and guidelines you have to meet in these plans. And so the cities and counties had to do what they were told at that point. And then, depending on, you know, what was happening politically in the state, cities were able to expand where they perhaps shouldn't have, or then get stepped on later. That's gone back and forth.
Is the funding mechanism the primary? Well, so how, you know, what I really want to get at here is whether or not you think that balance has kind of, or where that balance is today. It sounds like you know, what you said was that it's in the local side. So I mean, is funding the only mechanism or the only thing that could be used to get it back to be where it was intended to be?
Well, I'm not sure that's not where it was intended to be.
Okay. You elaborate more, because that's...
Well, I still see cities having to meet state standards, and I see lots of times when cities try to do things, or counties try to do things, where LCDC says, no, you can't do that. There's some big issues right now going on with it that's being tested, and non-farm uses on farmland is one of them that we've been engaged in recently. And that's pretty much been determined at the local level. You know, we tried to pass some legislation that put some uniformity in, but what came out was pretty weak. And counties still have pretty much the authority to say, you know, define what kind of activities and what kind of limitations are going to be on, you know, weddings and parties and sports activities and all these kind of things, farmers markets, all the kind of stuff that happens out there in rural lands.
So actually, at the beginning of when we first started talking, you had said that your role, I just think this just sounds so great. Your role was to not make sure that nothing got changed in that bill, but it sounded like there were some. I'm gonna wait for the ambulance to go by. It sounded like there were some interests, county interests, that you had to kind of say, no, we can't change anything?
The only one's the cities.
The city?
Yeah.
Okay,
The cities wanted to have the authorities of county that can't be
I see.
planned as well.
And so, if they did, how, I mean, what would that look like today?
Oh, big mess.
So that was a very important role, right?
Yeah, it was. I think it was.
Yeah.
Well, but the thing is, it never would have happened because it would have gone back and been killed in the Senate. So that's a really hypothetical issue. And unlike Ted Cruz, I don't mind answering hypotheticals, but
Well, but that would have radically changed the local
yeah.
state control. So how vital is that I should say, how vital is the system that was adopted into striking that balance here's the question that I should have started with. Is it successful in striking the balance?
It appears to be. If you look, overall, how we've done urban growth boundaries, they've been pretty effective, and we have lost a whole lot less farmland and forest land than any other states around. It has not been totally successful, obviously, because one of the things that happened was we were not operating on a clean slate. When it came in, you already had a lot of rural development. And so you can't say, all right, everybody's got to live in a city. If you've got people living here already, what are you going to do with them? So it's been kind of building a car while the car is moving down the road. I'm trying to get back to the question originally was.
Well, it's just about the state and local control.
Yeah, and another thought I had here. It'll come back to me.
Okay, yeah. So, I'm gonna keep coming back to that because I think that's so fascinating. But in what ways have prominent state and local elected officials, ballot measures, actions by the Oregon legislature, and key court rulings advanced or undercut the original purposes of Senate Bill 100 and the drafting and implementation of state planning goals?
Well, of course, we had several ballot measures to eliminate, and land use planning, those passed by pretty good majorities. And then the one, I always get 37 and 49 mixed up. But the final one that passed, and the numbers I get confused with. I'm a little dyslexic when it comes to numbers. But when the citizens said, no, this is what we want, was it 47?
49.
49. Now 49, well, that was passed by over 60%. It was huge. And it shows overall that the people of Oregon want land use planning. It also shows, if you look at the measure, Bill Measure 36, that people can be manipulated, and an emotional appeal. An old lady in Washington County, that's funny, is some people have enough money to put her on TV over and over again. Oh my God, I'll lose my land. Can do it. It can appeal to an innate sense of fairness that if you don't have enough money to show how it wasn't really an unfairness, can get folks, but then they realize what was going on. I had someone, and this is what I was going to talk about. After Ballot Measure 36 passed, and when they were drafting Ballot Measure 49, I give kudos to Greg McPherson, who was one of my heroes, another one of my heroes. Tim Nesbitt in the governor's office was in charge of writing that. And I was involved in that because I was representing OAPA. And I told him, I said, you're negotiating against yourself. He kept writing things, well, we should give him this, and we should give him that, because we don't want to see an ad that says such and such. And these were on details, and whether you're going to have 3 houses or 5 houses. And I said, Tim, you're negotiating against yourself. This battle is not going to be fought on TV on whether there's 3 houses or 5 houses. It's going to be fought on very broad general principles. And you don't need to give away all that stuff. And it was really angry at me. He said, well, Kafoury, we'll see how the vote goes and tell us who was right and who was wrong. And after he won big, I went back and I said, see, Tim, I was right and you were wrong. I've watched that battle of compensation for a long time, and you know, on one hand, people can say, you know, if the government says I can't do with what I want with my land, then I should be compensated for it. But it doesn't take into account the fact that what you do with your land, we're no longer pioneers. Where, you know, if you wanted to plow up your land and put some hogs over here in the corner, didn't make any difference. I mean, there's the Native Americans who took the land from, but I mean in terms of your neighbors. But now, when we all live so close together, everything you do has impact on other people. And the old thing about you can't swing your arm without hitting somebody in the face. You can swing your arm, it's okay, you hit somebody in the face. That's not, but if you reach back to swing your arm, you're going to hit somebody back here. In a way you didn't realize it. And land use has implications on neighbors. And there are a lot of them. I remember Henry Richmond telling me early on about the economic advantages of having dense development, because it costs so much to extend services out. And everybody shares the cost of that. The guy out here says, I want to live out here, I want to be on my land, and when I have service come out here, and it sounds fair to me. People don't realize, yeah, but who's going to pay for it? I remember watching, there was a bill in the legislature on telephone service in rural Clackamas County. I don't remember the details of it, but I kept saying, what's going on here? You know, who's paying for this? And think about the people who are going to live in rural Clackamas County. They're going to want, back in those days, a telephone hookup with their computers, and you know, they're going to want several lines, and it's going to be expensive to do that. And we shouldn't allow people to live out there and then demand they're going to get services. And that was a real insight to me, and it's not being pushed enough. People don't mention that as the advantage of land use planning. That's one problem that I think has. People talk about protecting farmland, but they don't talk about protecting ratepayers. And they don't talk about protecting taxpayers. Yeah, that one came up again. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, you talked about winning support, broad support based on broad principles. If you could say, you know, which ones were the most important broad principles that were communicated that people kind of really rallied behind, you know, I'd be interested in your thoughts on.
Oh, I think it's saving farmland, saving forest land, protecting our cities.
How are those mobilized? I mean, you know.
Tom McCall did one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. His death.
Yeah.
1,000 Friends of Oregon had a large outreach. They got a lot of lists, and there were people who spent money. What's his name? That's the big foundation. Eric Lemelson. You know, when you can reach into your back pocket and pull $1 million or $2 million out, that helps a lot. Oh, I know what I was going to say. The one other thing that is a problem that I think we haven't realized the solution of, not realize and understand, but realize and carrying out, is we've done a lot of good work on talk about what happens outside cities. We've done very little, in my view, of what happens inside cities. God, you drive through Beaverton and look at all those campuses and all that grass out there, those industrial campuses, and you think, and these people want more farmland to take up to build more Intel flats on? No. I don't know if you see a few high rises over there, Beaverton, before I let you grow your urban growth plan. And that's one thing, of course, obviously happening in Metro right now with the home builders. Oh, we don't have any more land here. Oh, yeah, we got lots of land. I live in the Portland County, but with demand, but I don't see that happening anywhere else. And I don't see any incentive or pressure, either carrot or sticks, to do that generally.
Well,
So I think that's failure of the land use system.
well, that's great. I mean, that's terrible, but that's great because I think one of the things that we have really tried to understand is in your opinion, has the Oregon land use program today, is it what was envisioned 4 decades ago?
I think generally speaking, very much so. But I'm really frustrated by the Big Look process. I had really high hopes for that, and then Karen Minnis just screwed it up terribly. She was the Speaker of the House, and she put bad people on the committee, and they went around in circles. They didn't have staff. Mike, what's the name of the former Senate President that ran Port of Portland? Anyway, he was in charge of it, and he was tight-fisted when he was legislator, and he was tight-fisted there, and didn't want to spend money on staff, so they didn't have staff, and they didn't have a good plan, they didn't know what they were going to do. It was just a really badly run organization, and they came up with nothing at the end. I thought it was really important to have some kind of official look to answer that question. Let's look. This was 30 years after. Let's look back 30 years. What's happened? And have we met our goals? Where are we? What kind of things ought we to be doing? Really important questions. Nobody's ever taken a broad look at it. Not in official capacity, obviously, individuals have done that, but nobody's taken a broad look and asked the questions that you were asking here. And I think it's really vital that the state government do that.
But an official assessment, fair enough. How in your personal opinion, how do you think it has evolved, or really less evolved? How if we took exactly what we have today and we went back 4 decades ago and said this is what's going on?
I think people largely would say, yeah, look, I'm proud of myself for putting that together. When I can drive around Washington County and say there's one side of the road there's farm, and the other side of the road there's houses, and it's been that way and going to stay that way. And then the new urban rural reserve process, I think people would say, that's something we didn't think of, but that makes a lot of sense. It fits into what we're trying to do. The Luba Court that developed, I think people would say that is really neat. On one hand, to get people who are experts in the area so they can make decisions on a quick timeline turnaround. I think they would say that's great. I think they might say, my God, I didn't realize that you were going to have a whole industry of land use lawyers. And that some things that perhaps should not have been stopped were stopped. But I think overall, I can't think of a lot of problems that have arisen. I mean, when you have a legislation introduced that say, let's cut citizens out of maybe citizen standing, cut that back so that they bring those suits. You have to be within 100 yards of a development in order to object to it, that kind of thing. And they'll bring up one or two things. My God, we could have had this plant in our neighborhood that would have provided 100 jobs. They'll bring one or two of those up, but I don't think anybody can say, I shouldn't say they can't say, they will say, but nobody can say with evidence, Nissa would have been a thriving community, but for land use money. And then you look at the value of farmland. Dick Benner made the comment in his talk the other day that if you put your money into farmland, half your money in farmland, half your money in the stock market in 1973, you'd come out even. The value of farmland has gone up tremendously, and that's because of the tax laws and the land use planning.
So, Are there any changes or additions you'd like to see in our planning laws and the statewide goals to enable Oregon's land use program to face future challenges?
Yeah, I think we need to spend a whole lot more money. We're not doing, and the guy whose name is on this building kept saying over and over again, nobody's looking 50 years down the road when we have 500,000 or whatever it is people come here. Where are these folks going to live? Planners are not planning. Planners are giving permits. And nobody's doing the long range of where we're going to be 50 years from now. And the urban rural reserve thing was great, but that's not enough. And it's only here. Nobody's doing that in Bend. Nobody's doing that in Medford. There needs to be more coordination, the regional coordination, and that takes money. But there's real interest in some places where they've done. I forget the name of it is, with regional problem solving. There's a jargon term for that.
Regional solutions.
Yeah, regional solutions. And those kind of things work really, really well. And we've looked at, and OIP has been trying to push, expanding that concept, getting more subjects into those, and setting up, some regional transportation planning areas where people figure out how we're going to, where we're going to be long term from now, how are we going to deal with climate change, how are we going to keep people living and working closely together, how we're going to cut down the need for building more highways, all those kind of questions that a long-range planning that needs to happen that isn't really happening right now. To some extent, we're resting on our laurels, and look what we've done, isn't that neat? And always think, what's the future? There's a really big question which I was concerned with in 1973, which has never really been answered. Carl Hostick and some people in Metro have done it. And that is, do we come to a point in urban growth expansion where we say, all right, that's the end? We're not going to go any bigger? He's talked about some lines, Tualatin River, Willamette River. Others in boundaries say, all right, this is it. Or are we going to say that the original bill envisioned expansion, controlled expansion. That as you got a lot of people and you need to expand, then you expanded, but not before that. I think sometime down the line we say, do we want to have, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, the Willamette Valley be sprawl all the way just because we got a goal that John Chandler put in and said you got to have 20 years of housing? Nobody's asked that question. And as I say, too long, Nomad kept saying, where are we going to put all these people? Is it all going to be in Portland? And if it's not, if we're going to try and get more people in Bend and Pendleton, then what are we going to do to make that happen? Nobody's asked that question except for him. And obviously nobody's working on that solution. So that's what needs to happen in the future.
Can you say a little bit more about the regional solutions, regional collaboration, and how that is a different dynamic than the state and local tension?
Well, I understand from people who've done this that once people start doing it, people find themselves, find out it really works. They can put people in the same building, and so you can, they're planning, the transportation director from one county and another county look at each other and talk, and that they can have air quality people and transportation people and water quality people, all in the same room and working on, in a voluntary collaborative way. This is not the LCDC model of following standards and needing to meet them, but just communicating together. And how can we do this planning cooperatively? There are some goals that they need to meet in terms of reducing greenhouse gases, for example, that this could be used for. But it's bigger than that. And there's a people, Richard Ross. Do you have him down here? I would get Richard Ross in here to talk about that.
Well,
He's a big thinker, big picture thinker.
We've got
And I'm just an observer. He's a guy who does this stuff, for a living.
Yeah. We've got 5 minutes left. What other thoughts? This says thoughts, anecdotes, experiences, but this has been. You've touched on a lot of different things.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah, absolutely. The 50-year planning question, vision process, actually doing planning. As you said, it sounds like that's what was going on in 1974.
Yeah.
But no one's doing that now. But that's quite a charge for planners today, I think.
Look at things. Some of this is being done now, but the issue of transmission lines. Mm-hmm. You've seen maps of the whole state is all over the transmission lines. Yeah. And there's not a coordination here. What does the state want to be? When we did that planning originally, one of the Willamette Valley scenarios, let's do a scenario again with transmission lines. And is this what we want our state to look like? And if not, what can we do about it? And what ought to be doing? And we've got this demand for more energy, we've got demand for greenhouse gas emission reduction, which pushes in one direction. And unless there's a big push the other way to say, well, that's fine, but where are we going to cite all this stuff that has minimizing the impacts of it? There was some legislation to do that, and it never came out. And it needs to happen.
Well, yeah.
Lots of work for you.
Lots of work, right? Yeah. But okay. I've got a chart moving forward. But for, we talked about a lot. What kind of anecdotes or experiences that did we jog that we didn't get a chance to talk about?
Well, it's been a real fascinating battle watching the two basic interests, the home builders and realtors together on one side, and essentially 1,000 friends, and sometimes local government on the other side. And that's a major battle every session. And there's been always, not so much now, but there were, when the Republicans were running things in the legislature, a lot of attempts to cut back land use plan in the battle of 1,000 cuts. Mm-hmm. And we used to have 1,000 friends and land use planners would go down there and there'd be like 90 bills, 90 bad bills that we had to work against. And they were all little things. Can we just cite a destination resort here? Can we allow this county to have some industrial sites? One-off kind of things like that, and changing. When we made this stupid thing about requiring 20 years of building supply, and then continual. That's so inflexible. Mm-hmm. And it was done because some people want to build houses, because that's what they do for a living.
Mm-hmm. I'm told that I have to wrap up, but I want to ask one more question.
Sure.
It's really, it's legislative in nature. Yeah. It's have you been following what's been going on with the data centers in all over Oregon and the kind of Oregon is the new hotspot for data centers. Any thoughts on what this might mean for land use and or transmission lines, even fiber, different types of transmission lines?
No, there was a long story on NPR that is one thing. I get going down to St. Louis, I get to listen to NPR and hear the whole story.
Yeah.
About But the focus was on whether they should be giving local tax breaks or not. There was no focus on the land use of it. I think, basically, it's a good thing to have employment opportunities in places like Prineville, the Dalles. The issue of transmission lines did not come up, but I think nobody's looking at long-term implications of, I don't know if those guys they use a lot of electricity. I don't think they use water. Some people use water. I guess that's more reefers in the Silicon Valley stuff that uses a lot of water. And housing. I mean, does anybody say, we've got enough housing? And house the people that are going to be going here? Everybody thinks that if I can just get a plant in my neighborhood, all the local people are going to work there. And nobody thinks, well, actually, no, it's going to be people from outside who are going to come in who are going to work there. There would be an interesting study for you.
Yeah.
I remember there's a guy named Mike Cass, who's an economist, who wrote a fascinating paper a few years ago saying that the smokestack chasing does not do economic development because as long as you have mobility of workers. And he has studies showing that. It would be fascinating to get that more widespread and to replicate his research.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for your time.
My pleasure. It's been fun. I enjoy doing this.
We've been speaking this morning with Stephen Kafoury, a state representative in the Oregon legislature during the 1970s when the state land use program was adopted. Again, thanks for joining us today.
Well,